Vivian's nostrils flared, inhaling Zara's expensive shampoo. "You don't belong here," she hissed, snatching the girl's boarding pass. Zara, 9 years old and clutching a stuffed elephant, didn't know her mother owned the airline, or that Vivian's world was about to crash. "She's clearly in the wrong section," Vivian continued, her voice dripping with the kind of prejudice that makes your blood boil. "People like that family can't afford these seats. There's obviously been some kind of mistake or fraud, but Zara wasn't causing any trouble. She wasn't being loud or disruptive. She was simply sitting in her assigned seat, clutching a small stuffed elephant, trying to understand why this stranger was saying such cruel things about her. The flight attendant, Sarah Chen, knelt down, trying to comfort the terrified child as Vivian's accusations grew more venomous. "I don't feel safe with her type on this plane," Vivian declared to anyone who would listen. "You never know with these kids from that background. She's probably dangerous." Other passengers began pulling out their phones, some recording the shocking display of racism, others looking uncomfortable but staying silent. Airport security was already boarding the aircraft, called by Vivian herself, who had convinced them that this innocent 9-year-old child was somehow a threat. But here's what Vivian Ashworth had no idea about as she stood there spewing her hatred and demanding that little Zara be removed from the plane. She had no clue who she was really messing with, because in less than 5 minutes, one phone call would reveal a truth so shocking that it would turn Vivian's entire world upside down. What Vivian was about to discover would not only destroy her life, but teach everyone watching a lesson they would never forget. If you believe in justice, hit the subscribe button now and type justice in the comments, because what happens next will absolutely blow your mind. But to understand just how devastating Vivian's downfall was about to be, we need to go back to the beginning of this story, to a beautiful morning in one of Chicago's most exclusive neighborhoods. There was a sprawling estate in Lincoln Park, where manicured gardens stretched as far as the eye could see, and the morning sun gleamed off floor-to-ceiling windows. Inside the elegant dining room, 9-year-old Zara Montgomery sat at a marble breakfast table, her legs swinging excitedly as she enjoyed pancakes with her mother, Victoria Montgomery. But this wasn't just any breakfast conversation. This was the moment that set everything in motion. "Mommy, I want to fly to Daddy's by myself. I'm big enough now," Zara announced with the determined confidence that only a 9-year-old could muster. Her mother, Victoria, an impeccably dressed woman with the kind of commanding presence that spoke of serious power, looked up from her tablet where she was reviewing reports from her aviation empire. Victoria hesitated. You could see the internal struggle in her eyes. As one of the most powerful women in the airline industry, she knew the world could be cruel and unfair, especially to young black girls. But she also believed deeply in raising her daughter to be independent and strong. "Sweetheart, you know how I feel about you traveling alone," Victoria said gently, but Zara's eyes lit up with excitement. "But you always say I should be independent and prove I can handle things myself," Zara responded. And there was something about her determination that melted Victoria's protective instincts. After a long pause, Victoria nodded. "All right, but we do this my way. No special treatment, no announcements about who you are. You travel like any other passenger." You see, Victoria had always kept Zara's identity private. Despite owning Montgomery Aviation, one of the largest airline companies in America, she wanted her daughter to experience a normal childhood, to be judged by her character rather than her family's wealth and influence. Zara practically bounced in her seat with excitement. This trip to see her father in Los Angeles wasn't just a visit. It was her chance to prove she was growing up, to show her mother she could handle the world on her own terms. But while Zara was dreaming of independence in her mansion across town in a very different Chicago neighborhood, another woman was having a very different kind of morning. Vivian Ashworth woke up in a cramped studio apartment where the walls seemed to be closing in around her. Bills were scattered across every surface. Overdue rent notices, credit card statements with astronomical balances, and there, prominently displayed on her kitchen counter, sat an eviction notice that made her stomach turn every time she saw it. At 52, Vivian's life was falling apart, and she knew it. Her failed business ventures had left her drowning in debt. Her relationships had crumbled, and now she was down to her very last chance. A business meeting in Los Angeles that could either save her or destroy what little she had left. With trembling hands, she pulled out her final credit card, the only one that wasn't maxed out, and booked a first-class ticket to LAX. It was money she couldn't afford to spend. But in Vivian's mind, appearance was everything. She needed to look successful, powerful, important. But here's where Vivian's true character revealed itself. As she stared at her reflection in her cracked bathroom mirror, her internal thoughts were ugly and revealing. "People need to know their place in society," she muttered to herself. "There's a natural order to things, and some people just don't belong in certain spaces." These weren't just casual thoughts. They were the deep-seated prejudices that had been festering in Vivian's mind for years. She genuinely believed that success, wealth, and status should belong to people who look like her, and that others, especially Black families, were somehow less deserving of the finer things in life. Meanwhile, at Chicago O'Hare Airport, another character in this drama was about to reveal her own biases. Jennifer Walsh, a gate agent who had been working the same job for 8 years, had developed her own twisted sense of who belonged where. When well-dressed white families approached her gate, Jennifer's face lit up with warm smiles and helpful suggestions. But when passengers who didn't fit her narrow worldview appeared, her demeanor changed completely. She was the kind of person who made snap judgments based on skin color and assumptions about economic status. And working on Flight 447 that day was a crew who had no idea they were about to witness one of the most shocking reversals in aviation history. Flight attendant Sarah Chen and Captain James Rodriguez were good people who believed in treating all passengers fairly, but they were completely unaware that the quiet little girl in seat 2A was actually the daughter of their ultimate boss. If you're already invested in seeing justice served, smash that subscribe button, because this story was about to get absolutely wild. Because what Victoria Montgomery didn't realize as she kissed her daughter goodbye and watched her head off to prove her independence was that Zara was about to face the ugly reality of prejudice that her mother had worked so hard to shield her from. And what Vivian Ashworth didn't know as she put on her designer knockoff outfit and headed to the airport was that she was about to target the one child who had the power to destroy her entire world with a single phone call. Now here's where the story takes a disturbing turn that will make your blood boil. Because what happened next at Chicago O'Hare Airport was a masterclass in how racism works in America. Sometimes subtle, sometimes not so subtle, but always devastating. It was a busy Friday afternoon at Gate B12, and Jennifer Walsh was working her usual shift as the gate agent. The first passengers to approach her counter were 2 adorable white girls, Emma and Sophie, ages 8 and 10, traveling as unaccompanied minors to visit their grandmother in Los Angeles. The moment Jennifer saw these blonde-haired, blue-eyed children walking up with their little rolling suitcases, her entire face transformed. It was like watching someone flip a switch from neutral to absolutely delighted. "Oh my goodness, how exciting!" Jennifer exclaimed, clapping her hands together. "Are you 2 flying all by yourselves today? What big girls you are!" Her voice was sugary sweet, the kind of tone adults use when they're genuinely charmed by children. She immediately came around from behind the counter, kneeling down to their level. "Let me get you some special treats for the flight," she said, pulling out coloring books, crayons, and extra snacks from her personal stash. "And you know what? I'm going to make sure you get to board first so you can pick the best seats." Jennifer then made an announcement over the gate's intercom system. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have some very special young travelers with us today. Everyone give a wave to Emma and Sophie, who are being so brave flying by themselves." The other passengers in the waiting area smiled warmly, some even applauding the 2 girls. Jennifer personally escorted them to special seating near the gate, chatting with them about their trip, asking about school, and treating them like little celebrities. "You girls are so well-behaved and polite," Jennifer gushed. "Your parents raised you right. I just know you're going to have the most wonderful flight." For 20 minutes, these 2 white children received the kind of treatment that would make any parent proud. Jennifer checked on them multiple times, brought them juice boxes, and even called ahead to the flight crew to let them know there were 2 absolutely darling little passengers boarding today. But then something happened that exposed the ugly truth about how differently children are treated in this country based on the color of their skin. 9-year-old Zara Montgomery approached the same gate counter, walking with quiet confidence and carrying her small backpack. She had the same unaccompanied minor paperwork, the same polite demeanor, and the same excitement about flying alone for the first time. But the moment Jennifer Walsh looked up and saw this young black girl standing at her counter, everything changed. The warm smile vanished from Jennifer's face like someone had wiped it away with a cloth. Her posture stiffened. Her voice became cold and professional. And suddenly, this 9-year-old child wasn't a special young traveler. She was a problem to be solved. "Can I help you?" Jennifer asked in a flat, almost annoyed tone, not bothering to make eye contact with Zara. Zara, still riding high on her excitement about the trip, smiled brightly and handed over her documentation. "Hi, I'm flying to Los Angeles to see my daddy." Jennifer took the papers with obvious reluctance, and when she saw the first-class designation, her expression shifted to outright suspicion. She held the boarding pass up to the light as if she were inspecting a counterfeit bill. "This is first class," Jennifer said slowly, her voice dripping with doubt. "Are you sure this is correct? These tickets are very expensive." Zara's smile faltered slightly. She could sense something was wrong, but being only 9 years old, she couldn't quite understand what. "Yes, ma'am. My mommy bought it for me." Jennifer's eyes narrowed. "Maybe you should double-check with your parents about where you're supposed to sit. Sometimes there are mix-ups with these computer systems." Now remember, Jennifer had just spent 20 minutes treating 2 white girls like royalty without questioning a single document. She didn't ask Emma and Sophie if their tickets were correct. She didn't suggest they double-X check it with their parents. She didn't inspect their paperwork under a light. But here was Zara with legitimate documentation being treated like a fraud simply because Jennifer couldn't believe that a black family could afford first-class tickets. "I need to verify this," Jennifer announced loudly, making sure other passengers could hear. She picked up her phone and made a show of calling her supervisor, even though she had already confirmed that all of Zara's paperwork was legitimate. While Jennifer was on the phone, supposedly verifying documents that were perfectly valid, Zara was forced to stand to the side and wait. She watched as other passengers began to stare at her, whispering among themselves about why this little girl was being detained. The contrast was heartbreaking. 20 minutes earlier, Emma and Sophie had been celebrated and pampered. Now Zara was being treated like a suspect in her own travel plans. "Ma'am," Zara said politely when Jennifer got off the phone, "is there a problem?" "My mommy said everything was taken care of." Jennifer looked down at this respectful, well-spoken child, and her response was chilling. "Well, these things happen. Sometimes people make mistakes about what they can afford." The implication was clear. Jennifer was suggesting that Zara's family had somehow purchased tickets they couldn't afford, or that there had been some kind of error that needed to be corrected. She was treating this 9-year-old like she was trying to sneak into a section where she didn't belong. After 15 more minutes of unnecessary verification, Jennifer finally reluctantly allowed Zara to board. But there were no treats, no special announcements, no warm wishes for a wonderful flight. Just a cold, professional proceed to the gate and a look that made it clear Jennifer believed she was making a mistake. Can you imagine being 9 years old and experiencing this kind of treatment? The confusion, the hurt, the dawning realization that you're being treated differently simply because of how you look. But Zara Montgomery was a strong, resilient child, and she walked down that jet bridge with her head held high, even though she could feel the stares of passengers who had witnessed her humiliating treatment at the gate. She found her way to seat 2A, carefully placed her small backpack in the overhead compartment, and settled in with her beloved stuffed elephant, Sky. She pulled out a children's book about airplanes, trying to focus on her excitement about seeing her father and proving to her mother that she could handle traveling alone. For a few peaceful moments, Zara sat quietly reading, her legs dangling from the first-class seat that was rightfully hers. She was just a little girl, lost in her book, completely unaware that her ordeal was far from over. Because that's when Vivian Ashworth boarded the plane. Vivian walked down the aisle with exaggerated confidence, her designer knockoff handbag prominently displayed, her head held high like she owned the aircraft. She was putting on a performance, trying to project the success and importance that her bank account couldn't back up. She glanced at her boarding pass, seat 4C, and then looked toward the front of the cabin to see what kind of passengers she'd be sitting near. After all, in Vivian's mind, first class was her domain, the place where important people like herself belonged. But when her eyes landed on seat 2A and she saw a young black girl sitting there, everything in Vivian's twisted worldview came crashing down. This couldn't be right. In Vivian's prejudiced mind, children like Zara simply didn't belong in first class. They didn't have the money, the status, or the right to occupy premium seats. And certainly not when Vivian herself was struggling financially and desperately needed to maintain the appearance of success. With her fake smile plastered on her face, Vivian approached Zara's seat. "Sweetie," she said in a condescending tone that dripped with false kindness, "I think you're confused. This section isn't for people like you." Zara looked up from her book, her young eyes wide with confusion. "Ma'am, this is the first-class section," Vivian continued, her voice getting slightly sharper. "I don't know how you got that ticket, but you clearly don't belong here. The regular seats are back that way." Zara's heart started beating faster. She didn't understand why another adult was questioning her right to be there, just like the gate agent had. "This is my seat," she said quietly, showing Vivian her boarding pass. "It says 2A. Vivian snatched the boarding pass from Zara's small hands and examined it like she was a detective investigating a crime. "This is first class," she said loudly enough for other passengers to hear. "This is for successful, important people, not for people like your family." The racism in Vivian's words was barely concealed. She was essentially telling this 9-year-old child that black families didn't deserve to sit in premium sections, that wealth and success were somehow reserved for white people like herself. "Ma'am, this really is my seat," Zara said, her voice starting to shake. She was beginning to understand that something was very wrong, that she was being targeted for reasons she couldn't quite grasp. "Don't argue with me, young lady," Vivian snapped, her mask of false politeness completely slipping away. "I'm an adult and I know how these things work. You need to gather your things and move to where you belong." Other first-class passengers were starting to take notice of the commotion. Some looked uncomfortable, sensing that something inappropriate was happening. Others seemed to be buying into Vivian's narrative that there was some kind of mistake that needed to be corrected. That's when Sarah Chen, the lead flight attendant, noticed the disturbance and approached the seats. "Is everything all right here?" she asked diplomatically, trying to keep her voice calm and professional. Vivian immediately turned to Sarah as if she were a manager being called to handle a difficult customer. "Yes, thank you. There's obviously been some kind of computer error. This child is sitting in first class, but she clearly belongs in coach." Sarah looked at the boarding pass that Vivian was still clutching in her hand, then at Zara's tearful face. "Ma'am, may I see both boarding passes, please?" Vivian handed over both documents with the confidence of someone who believed she was about to be proven right. Sarah examined them carefully, checking the seat assignments and passenger information. "I'm sorry, ma'am," Sarah said to Vivian, "but this young lady's seat assignment is correct. She's in 2A and you're in 4C, which is right over there." The color drained from Vivian's face as her argument fell apart. But instead of apologizing or accepting the facts, she doubled down on her racism. "That's impossible," Vivian exclaimed. "There's obviously been some kind of mistake or fraud. Families like hers don't fly first class. Someone made an error in the system. If you're as angry as I am by what you're hearing, make sure you hit that subscribe button because what happens next is going to shock you to your core." Now, I want to ask you something. Have you ever witnessed discrimination like this where someone assumed another person didn't belong somewhere based purely on their race? How did it make you feel? And what did you do about it? Let me know in the comments. Because what Vivian Ashworth didn't realize as she stood there making her racist accusations was that she had just made the biggest mistake of her entire life. She had no idea that the computer error she was demanding to be fixed was about to reveal a truth that would destroy her world completely. And little Zara Montgomery, sitting there with tears forming in her eyes as this adult stranger attacked her for simply existing in a space she had every right to occupy, was about to show the entire world what real power looked like. What happened next will absolutely surprise you because Vivian Ashworth was about to cross a line that no decent human being should ever cross. When she realized that she couldn't get Zara removed from first class through legitimate means, she decided to weaponize the most dangerous stereotypes about black children in America. Standing there in the aisle, watching as the flight attendant confirmed that Zara's seat was indeed correct. Vivian felt her carefully constructed world starting to crumble. This wasn't supposed to happen. In her twisted mind, there was a natural order to things. Young black girls simply didn't belong in the same spaces as important white women like herself. But Vivian Ashworth was a woman who had spent her entire life getting what she wanted through manipulation and lies. And if she couldn't move Zara through official channels, then she was going to create a narrative that would force everyone to see this innocent child as a threat. Sarah Chen had just walked away to help other passengers when Vivian saw her opportunity. She leaned down toward Zara's seat, her voice loud enough for nearby passengers to hear, and began weaving a web of lies that would have been laughable if they weren't so dangerous. "Excuse me," Vivian called out to Sarah, who was helping another passenger with their luggage. "I need to report something. This child has been behaving very inappropriately." Sarah turned around surprised. She had just confirmed Zara's seat assignment, and everything had seemed fine. "I'm sorry, what do you mean?" "This child was being aggressive and intimidating toward me," Vivian declared, pointing down at Zara, who was still sitting quietly with her book in her lap, looking completely bewildered by the accusations. "Ma'am, I was standing right here," Sarah said, clearly confused. "I didn't see any aggressive behavior, but Vivian was just getting started. Before you came over, she was giving me threatening looks and acting very suspicious. I'm telling you, something isn't right with this child." Zara's 9-year-old mind couldn't process what was happening. She looked up at Vivian with tears forming in her eyes. "Ma'am, I was just reading my book. I didn't do anything wrong." "See?" Vivian said triumphantly, as if Zara's confused response proved her point. "She's lying now. I know aggressive behavior when I see it." Other passengers were starting to pay attention to the commotion. Some looked skeptical of Vivian's claims, but others began studying Zara with new suspicion, as if this well-behaved child had suddenly transformed into some kind of threat. Sarah looked back and forth between the agitated adult and the tearful child, trying to make sense of accusations that seemed to have no basis in reality. "Ma'am, I really don't see any problem here. Perhaps if we could all just—" "No, you don't understand," Vivian interrupted, her voice rising with fake urgency. "Children from her background can be unpredictable. I've seen the news. You never know with these kids." The racism in Vivian's words hit the cabin like a physical blow. She wasn't just attacking Zara anymore. She was attacking every black child in America, perpetuating the dangerous stereotype that black children are inherently violent, unpredictable, and threatening. "I've worked with troubled children before," Vivian continued, building her false narrative. "And I'm telling you, this one has all the warning signs. She's the type that causes trouble." Zara was now openly crying, clutching her stuffed elephant tighter as this stranger painted her as some kind of dangerous criminal. "I didn't do anything," she whispered to her tears. "I just want to see my daddy." But Vivian was relentless. She had found a weapon that she knew would be effective. The fear and prejudice that too many people harbor about black children, and she was going to use it to get what she wanted. "Look at how she's responding now," Vivian said, gesturing at Zara's tears as if they were evidence of guilt rather than the natural reaction of a frightened child. "This isn't normal behavior. Something is seriously wrong here." Sarah was growing increasingly uncomfortable with the situation. Every instinct told her that Vivian was lying, but the woman was so confident, so insistent, that doubt began creeping in. This is how racism works. It makes people question their own judgment and defer to the prejudices of others. "Ma'am," Sarah said carefully, "I think perhaps there's been a misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding," Vivian snapped. "I'm a paying customer in first class, and I shouldn't have to deal with this kind of disruptive behavior. I demand that something be done about this situation immediately." Several passengers were now openly staring at the confrontation. Some pulled out their phones to record, sensing that something significant was happening. Others whispered among themselves, debating whether Vivian's concerns were legitimate or whether they were witnessing something much darker. An elderly white man in seat 4A spoke up. "I've been watching this whole time, and that little girl hasn't done anything wrong. She's been sitting there quietly reading." But Vivian immediately turned on him too. "Sir, with all due respect, you don't know what happened before you were paying attention. This child was definitely behaving threateningly." "I was reading about airplanes," Zara said softly, holding up her children's book as if it could somehow prove her innocence. I like airplanes because my mommy works with them. See how she keeps making things up? Vivian said, seizing on Zara's innocent comment about her mother. First, she claims she belongs in first class. Now she's making up stories about her family. These are classic signs of a troubled child. The toxicity of Vivian's accusations was spreading through the cabin like poison. She was turning Zara's every word, every tear, every natural response into evidence of some imaginary threat. This is how innocent black children get criminalized in America, through the willful misinterpretation of their most basic human reactions. Sarah was at a loss. She'd been trained to handle difficult passengers, but she had never encountered a situation where an adult was making such serious accusations against a child who appeared to be completely innocent. Perhaps I should call the captain, Sarah suggested, hoping that a higher authority could sort out this increasingly disturbing situation. Yes, Vivian said immediately. And I think you should also call security. This child clearly needs professional intervention. Zara's eyes went wide with terror at the mention of security. Please don't call security, she whispered. I didn't do anything bad. Can I call my mommy? But Vivian saw Zara's fear as an opportunity to escalate even further. You see, now she's getting panicked and desperate. This is exactly what I was worried about. We need to act before this situation gets worse. What Vivian did next was so calculated, so deliberately evil, that it's hard to believe someone could sink so low. She excused herself to go to the bathroom, but instead of heading to the lavatory, she slipped into the galley area where she could make a phone call without being overheard. She dialed airport security, and when someone answered, she launched into a performance that would have been worthy of an Oscar if it weren't so morally reprehensible. Hello, this is a passenger on flight 447, Vivian said in a voice that perfectly balanced concern with urgency. I need to report a very serious situation. There's an unaccompanied black child in first class who's been acting threatening and aggressive toward passengers. The security officer on the other end of the line immediately became alert. Can you describe the nature of the threats? She's been making intimidating gestures and giving passengers menacing looks. Vivian lied smoothly. She doesn't belong in first class, and she's making everyone around her very uncomfortable. I'm genuinely concerned about what she might do. How old is this child? The officer asked. Maybe 9 or 10, Vivian replied. But you know how it is these days. Age doesn't always matter when it comes to potential violence. She seems very unstable. Are there any adults with her? No, she's completely unaccompanied, which makes it even more concerning. Vivian said, Look, I don't want to sound alarmist, but given everything that's happening in our society these days, I think we need to be very careful. You never know what these kids might be capable of. The racist dog whistles in Vivian's language were clear to anyone paying attention. She was invoking fear about black violence, suggesting that a 9-year-old child posed some kind of security threat simply because of her race. We need to remove her from the aircraft before something serious happens, Vivian continued. The other passengers are getting nervous, and I'm worried about everyone's safety. We'll have officers there in a few minutes, the security dispatcher assured her. Thank you, Vivian said, adding one final lie to seal the deal. I just hope we're not too late. This child seems very unpredictable. When Vivian returned to the cabin, she was practically glowing with satisfaction. She had weaponized every racist stereotype about black children and turned them into what she believed would be an effective tool for getting Zara removed from the plane. I've taken care of the situation, she announced to Sarah and the nearby passengers. Security is on their way to handle this properly. Zara overheard this and began crying harder. What did I do wrong? She asked through her tears. Why is everyone being mean to me? This is for everyone's safety, Vivian said coldly, looking down at this terrified child with absolutely no remorse. Sometimes difficult situations require adult intervention. Sarah was horrified. Ma'am, you called security. I really don't think that was necessary. Perhaps we should. It was absolutely necessary, Vivian interrupted. That child is clearly disturbed, and I'm not going to sit here and wait for something bad to happen. Other passengers were now openly taking sides. Some were defending Zara, pointing out that she had done nothing wrong. Others seemed swayed by Vivian's authoritative demeanor and her repeated claims about safety concerns. A young mother with 2 children of her own spoke up. I've been watching this whole time, and that little girl has been nothing but polite and quiet. This is absolutely ridiculous. But Vivian had an answer for every defense of Zara. Ma'am, you have children of your own. Surely you understand the importance of being cautious. We can't take risks when it comes to everyone's safety. Captain Rodriguez's voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a brief delay while we address some security procedures. We appreciate your patience and will have you on your way shortly. The announcement sent a chill through the cabin. Passengers began looking around nervously, many of them glancing towards Zara, who was now the center of a security concern that she didn't understand and had done nothing to create. Please, Zara said to Sarah, her voice barely audible through her tears. Can I call my mommy now? She told me to call if anything happened. If you disagree with what Vivian did to this innocent child, hit that subscribe button because what happens when she makes that phone call is going to change everything. Because what Vivian Ashworth didn't realize as she sat there feeling proud of her lies and manipulation was that she had just set in motion a series of events that would expose her racism to the entire world. And the phone call that Zara was about to make wouldn't just bring comfort to a frightened child. It would bring the full weight of justice crashing down on a woman who thought she could destroy a 9-year-old's life without consequences. Security was already boarding the plane, ready to treat this innocent child like a criminal based on nothing but the racist lies of a desperate woman. But they had no idea that they were about to encounter the most powerful family in the aviation industry, and that their actions in the next few minutes would be scrutinized by the entire country. The words that Victoria Montgomery had just spoken over the phone hit the cabin like a thunderbolt that changed everything in an instant. I'm Victoria Montgomery, CEO of Montgomery Aviation. You're questioning my daughter on an aircraft my company owns. Officer Maya Patel stood there holding the phone, her mind trying to process the full magnitude of what she had just heard. Around her, passengers who had overheard the conversation began whispering urgently to each other as the implications spread through the cabin like wildfire. The quiet little girl in seat 2A, the one who had been accused of being dangerous and not belonging in first class, was the daughter of the woman who owned the entire airline. Not just this plane, the entire company with its fleet of over 200 aircraft, thousands of employees, and billions in annual revenue. Derek Thompson looked at Maya with wide eyes, then at Zara, who was still sitting quietly with her stuffed elephant, completely unaware that her mother's identity had just been revealed to everyone around her. The irony was staggering. Vivian had targeted the one child on Earth who literally owned the seat she was sitting in. Passengers throughout the cabin were now pulling out their phones, frantically Googling Victoria Montgomery and Montgomery Aviation. As the search results populated, faces went pale as people realized they had just witnessed someone attack the daughter of one of the most powerful women in America. Captain Rodriguez, who had been monitoring the situation from the cockpit, came rushing down the aisle when he heard Victoria Montgomery's name mentioned. As a 15-year veteran pilot with the company, he knew exactly who Victoria Montgomery was, and the color drained from his face when he realized what had been happening to her daughter. "Officers," the captain said urgently, his voice shaking slightly. "Mrs. Montgomery is not just any CEO. She's one of the most respected business leaders in the country. If someone has been targeting her daughter with false accusations..." But before he could finish his sentence, the cabin door opened and Victoria Montgomery herself stepped onto the aircraft, and everyone immediately understood why Shiki commanded such respect in the business world. She moved with a kind of commanding presence that filled every inch of space around her. Dressed in an elegant charcoal business suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, her posture straight and her expression focused, Victoria Montgomery looked like exactly what she was. One of the most powerful women in America, and a mother whose child had been attacked. Behind her came Marcus Thompson, her head of security, a former Secret Service agent whose imposing presence made it clear this was serious business. Following him were 2 additional security personnel and a member of her legal team carrying tablets and documentation. This wasn't just a concerned mother arriving to check on her child. This was a CEO conducting a full corporate investigation into an attack on her family. The entire atmosphere in the cabin shifted instantly. Passengers sat up straighter. Conversations stopped mid-sentence, and even the most seasoned flight crew stood at attention. Everyone could sense that they were witnessing something extraordinary. The moment when someone who had tried to weaponize racism was about to face the full consequences of their actions. But despite all the power and authority she commanded, Victoria's eyes immediately found Zara, and her expression softened completely as she saw her daughter's tear-stained face and the way she was clutching her stuffed elephant like a lifeline. Victoria walked directly to seat 2A, her expensive heels clicking on the cabin floor, and knelt down beside her daughter, pulling Zara into a fierce protective embrace that spoke to every parent watching. "Mommy's here, sweetheart," Victoria whispered, her voice gentle and loving, despite the storm brewing behind her eyes. "You're safe now. You did absolutely nothing wrong, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows that." Zara clung to her mother, finally able to release the fear and confusion she had been holding inside for what felt like hours. "Mommy, I don't understand why that lady was so mean to me. I was just sitting in my seat reading my airplane book like you taught me." "I know, baby," Victoria said, stroking Zara's hair with the tenderness that only a mother could show. "And Mommy's going to make sure nothing like this ever happens to you or any other child again." Victoria stood up slowly, and when she turned to face the cabin, her expression had transformed back into the steely determination of a CEO who was about to handle the most important business of her life, protecting her daughter and ensuring justice was served. "Officers," she said to Maya and Derek, her voice carrying the kind of authority that made Fortune 500 executives take notes. "I want to see every piece of security footage from this incident immediately. I want witness statements from every passenger who observed what happened, and I want a complete timeline of events from the moment my daughter boarded this aircraft." Marcus Thompson stepped forward with a tablet that displayed the complete video record from multiple angles. The gate area where Jennifer Walsh had discriminated against Zara, the boarding process, and every interaction in the cabin. The Montgomery Aviation security team had access to footage that even the airport security officers hadn't seen yet. Victoria watched the footage with the focused attention of someone who was building an airtight case. Her business empire hadn't been built by accepting injustice or allowing problems to go unrest, and she approached this situation with the same methodical precision she used in boardrooms. What she saw in that footage made her jaw clench with barely controlled anger. The video clearly showed Vivian approaching Zara unprovoked, demanding she move from her rightful seat, making increasingly aggressive and racially charged accusations, and finally calling security with completely fabricated claims about a 9-year-old child being dangerous. But it was the audio from Vivian's phone call to security that truly revealed the depth of her racism. Marcus had enhanced the sound quality, and Victoria could hear every word of Vivian's lies about an unaccompanied black child acting threatening and her coded language about being careful given everything happening in society. "Where is the woman who made these accusations against my daughter?" Victoria asked, her voice carrying the kind of authority that made everyone in the cabin pay immediate attention. Officer Maya pointed toward Vivian, who had been standing near the back of the first-class section, trying to blend into the background as she slowly realized that something had gone terribly, catastrophically wrong with her plan. Vivian's face had gone from confident to confused to terrified as she watched this powerful woman board the plane and embrace the child she had tried to destroy. She was beginning to understand that she might have made the biggest mistake of her life, but she had no idea just how big that mistake really was. Victoria walked directly to where Vivian was standing, her heels clicking ominously on the cabin floor. And for the first time since this ordeal began, Vivian found herself face to face with real power. The kind of power that could change lives with a single decision. "Miss Ashworth," Victoria said, reading Vivian's name from the passenger manifest that Marcus had pulled up on his tablet. "I'm Victoria Montgomery. I believe you have some explaining to do." The color drained completely from Vivian's face as she realized who she was talking to. She had spent her morning Googling successful business people for her failed meeting, and she recognized the name and face of one of the most powerful CEOs in America. I don't understand what's happening," Vivian stammered. Her earlier confidence completely evaporated. "You don't understand?" Victoria repeated, her voice dangerously calm in the way that made corporate rivals nervous and board members straighten in their chairs. "Let me help you understand exactly what you've done today." Victoria gestured towards Zara, who was watching wide-eyed as her mother handled the situation. You saw a black child in first class and immediately assumed she didn't belong there. You decided that a 9-year-old girl didn't have the right to occupy a premium seat because of the color of her skin. No, that's not what happened, Vivian protested weakly, but her voice lacked any conviction. There was a legitimate concern about seating arrangements, and there was no legitimate concern. Victoria cut her off with the sharpness of someone who had destroyed corporate opponents with fewer words. You made racist assumptions about my daughter's right to be here based solely on your prejudiced worldview. The entire cabin was dead silent as passengers witnessed this confrontation. Many were recording on their phones, sensing that they were watching something that would be talked about for years to come and shared millions of times across social media. Let me tell you what really happened here, Victoria continued, her voice rising with controlled fury that made the cabin feel electric. You called security and made false claims that my 9-year-old daughter was dangerous and threatening. You tried to criminalize a child who was sitting quietly reading a book about airplanes. Vivian tried desperately to backtrack, finally understanding the gravity of her situation. There must have been a misunderstanding. I was just concerned about safety and making sure everyone was in their correct seats. Safety. Victoria's voice was ice cold, and passengers could feel the temperature in the cabin drop. The only threat to safety on this aircraft was your racism and your willingness to lie to law enforcement about a child. Victoria turned to address the entire cabin, her voice carrying to every passenger and crew member. Ladies and gentlemen, what you witnessed today was not a misunderstanding or a safety concern. This was racial discrimination in its most toxic form. An adult woman trying to humiliate and criminalize a child because she believed that black families don't deserve to occupy the same spaces as white families. Several passengers nodded in agreement, and some called out support for Victoria's words. Others looked deeply uncomfortable as they realized they had witnessed blatant racism and done nothing to stop it, making them complicit in Zara's humiliation. An elderly man in seat 4B spoke up. Mrs. Montgomery, I'm ashamed that I didn't do more to help your daughter. I could see what was happening was wrong. A young mother with her own children added, I wanted to say something, but I didn't know how to intervene. I'm so sorry your little girl had to go through this. Victoria acknowledged their regret, but made it clear that the real lesson was about taking action. I appreciate your honesty, but the next time you see someone being targeted because of their race, I hope you'll remember today and find the courage to speak up. Children especially need adults to protect them from this kind of hatred. This behavior has no place in our society or on our aircraft, Victoria declared, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had just made a decision that would have far-reaching consequences. Miss Ashworth, you are hereby banned for life from all Montgomery Aviation properties and aircraft. That includes our 12 airlines, our cargo services, our maintenance facilities, and any future acquisitions. You can't do that, Vivian protested desperately, finally understanding that her actions had real consequences. I have rights. I need to travel for business. You had rights, Victoria replied with the cold precision of a CEO delivering a death sentence to a failed venture. You forfeited those rights when you filed a false police report against a 9-year-old child and attempted to weaponize racism against my family. Marcus stepped forward with official paperwork that had been prepared during the flight. Ms. Ashworth, you're being served with a formal trespassing notice for all Montgomery Aviation properties. You're also being reported to law enforcement for filing a false police report, which is a felony in this jurisdiction. The reality of her situation finally hit Vivian like a freight train, carrying the weight of her destroyed future. Not only was she banned from a major airline company that controlled significant market share, but she was facing serious criminal charges that could result in jail time and massive fines. Her last-ditch business meeting in Los Angeles, her final chance to save her failing financial situation, was now impossible. The very racism she had tried to use as a weapon had destroyed any hope she had of rebuilding her life. Please, Vivian begged, all her earlier arrogance and false authority completely gone, replaced by the desperation of someone watching their world collapse in real time. I made a mistake. I was just trying to help ensure proper seating arrangements. I never meant for this to escalate. You made a choice, Victoria corrected her firmly. You chose to see a black child in a space you thought she didn't belong, and you chose to try to remove her using lies and racial stereotypes. Those were mistakes. They were deliberate acts of racism. Victoria's legal team stepped forward with additional documentation. Miss Ashworth, you should also be aware that this incident has been fully documented and will be shared with other airlines and travel industry partners. Your actions today will have consequences far beyond our company. The implications were staggering. Vivian wasn't just being banned from Montgomery Aviation. She was being blacklisted from an industry where Victoria Montgomery's word carried enormous weight. Security officers moved to escort Vivian off the aircraft while she continued to protest and make increasingly desperate excuses. As she was led down the aisle, passengers actually began applauding, not just for Victoria's decisive action, but for the fact that justice was being served immediately and comprehensively. "This is discrimination against me," Vivian shouted as security guided her toward the door. "I'm being punished for trying to maintain order." Victoria's response was swift and final. "You're being punished for racism. There's a difference, and it's a difference you should have learned long before today." As Vivian was removed from the aircraft, several passengers approached Victoria to express their support and apologize for their inaction. An elderly businessman said, "Mrs. Montgomery, I'm deeply ashamed that I didn't speak up sooner. Your daughter was clearly being mistreated, and I should have intervened." A young mother with children of her own added, "I'm so sorry this happened to Zara. No child should have to experience what she went through today. You've shown us all how to stand up for what's right." A teenage passenger traveling with her family approached Shilly. "Mrs. Montgomery, can I tell Zara that she was really brave? I don't think I could have handled what she went through with such grace." Victoria accepted their apologies graciously, but used each interaction as a teaching moment. "Thank you for your honesty about not intervening earlier, but I want you to remember this feeling the next time you witness discrimination. Children like Zara need adults to be their advocates and protectors." She turned to address the entire cabin one more time. "What happened here today is a reminder that racism still exists in our society, and it often targets the most vulnerable among us, our children. But it's also a reminder that when we stand together against injustice, we can make a real difference." Throughout all of this, Zara had been watching quietly from her seat, processing everything that had happened with the remarkable resilience that children often display in difficult situations. When Victoria returned to check on her, Zara said something that stopped everyone in their tracks and would later be quoted in news articles around the world. "Mommy, I hope that lady learns that all kids deserve to be treated fairly, no matter what they look like. Maybe what happened today will help her be nicer to other people she meets." The grace and wisdom in those words, coming from a 9-year-old who had just experienced blatant racism and false accusations, left many passengers speechless and some openly crying. Here was a child who had been attacked and humiliated by an adult, showing more maturity, compassion, and wisdom than many grown-ups ever demonstrate in their entire lives. Victoria knelt down and hugged her daughter again, overwhelmed with pride at Zara's strength and character. "You are the most amazing, wise, and brave little girl in the world," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Captain Rodriguez made an announcement over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Montgomery Aviation and the entire crew, we sincerely apologize for the delay and for the completely unacceptable treatment that one of our passengers experienced today. We are committed to ensuring that all travelers are treated with dignity and respect regardless of their age, race, or any other factor." Victoria stood up and addressed the cabin one final time, using her platform to deliver a message that would resonate far beyond this single flight. What happened today is a stark reminder that racism still exists in our society, and it often targets the most vulnerable among us, our children. I'm announcing today that Montgomery Aviation will be implementing enhanced anti-discrimination training for all employees, creating new protocols to protect passengers from racial profiling, and establishing a fund to support organizations that fight racism in travel and transportation. The passengers applauded this announcement, and several people approached to offer their support for these initiatives and to ask how they could contribute to the cause. The flight finally took off 3 hours behind schedule. but with Zara now receiving the kind of treatment she should have had from the beginning. Flight attendants checked on her regularly, bringing her extra snacks and coloring books. Passengers smiled and waved, and several people shared their own stories about overcoming discrimination and the importance of standing up for others. When they landed in Los Angeles, David Montgomery was waiting at the gate with an enormous bouquet of flowers and a smile that could light up the entire terminal. As he embraced his daughter, lifting her high in the air, he said, "I heard you were incredibly brave today, sweetheart. I'm so proud of the strong, wise young lady you're becoming." "Daddy, it was really scary at first, but Mommy came and made everything better," Zara said, still processing everything that had happened, but clearly relieved to be safe in her father's arms. "Your mommy's pretty amazing, isn't she?" David said, exchanging a look with Victoria that spoke of shared pride in their daughter's strength. But what Zara didn't fully understand yet was that her story was already spreading across social media like wildfire. Videos of Victoria's confrontation with Vivian had been posted by multiple passengers and were going viral, sparking national conversations about racism and travel, the importance of protecting children from discrimination, and the power of immediate corporate accountability. News outlets picked up the story within hours with headlines like, "CEO Mother Destroys Racist Who Targeted Her 9-year-old Daughter," and airline executive shows how to handle discrimination with swift justice. Victoria's decisive response became a model for how companies should handle discrimination. Praised by civil rights leaders and business ethics experts alike, Zara's grace under pressure inspired countless people who saw that a 9-year-old could face hatred with dignity and still hope for the best in people. Her words about hoping the woman would learn to be nicer became a rallying cry for approaching racism with both strength and compassion. Meanwhile, the consequences for Vivian Ashworth continued to multiply. Her business meeting was canceled when her potential partners saw the viral videos. Her criminal charges for filing a false police report proceeded through the legal system. Her actions were now public record, searchable online forever, making future employment prospects nearly impossible. The apartment she was facing eviction from became irrelevant when she couldn't afford rent anyway. The financial desperation that had driven her to book a first-class ticket she couldn't afford had led her to destroy what little future she might have had. But perhaps most devastatingly, Vivian had to live with the knowledge that she had tried to use the full weight of systemic racism to destroy a 9-year-old child. And that child had responded with more grace and wisdom than Vivian had shown in her entire adult life. Victoria Montgomery, meanwhile, used the attention from the incident to launch a comprehensive initiative against discrimination in travel. The Montgomery Foundation announced a $10 million fund to support organizations fighting racism, provide legal assistance to victims of discrimination, and create educational programs about unconscious bias. If you enjoyed this story, like, subscribe, and share with others so they can learn too. See you in our next